He thought the courtroom was a stage. The judge, the cameras, the witnesses, all just part of his audience. 17-year-old Ava Monroe leaned back in her chair, smirking as the prosecutor listed her charges. To her, it was all noise. Another headline, another chance to trend. Even when the officer took the stand, the same one she mocked on live stream, she rolled her eyes, whispering under her breath for the crowd to hear. But then the judge spoke. No yelling, no anger, just 10 quiet seconds that changed everything. The kind of silence that makes you realize the show is over and reality has finally arrived. Before we show you what the judge said in those 10 seconds, make sure you're subscribed, turn on that bell icon, and comment below where you're watching from. Because this is one courtroom moment you'll never forget. This story is a work of fiction and not based on real events. The courthouse wasn't new, but it gleamed like it had been scrubbed for someone important. Cameras flashed outside the entrance as 22-year-old Ava Monroe stepped from a black SUV, flanked by her manager and a stylist still tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She smiled, not the nervous smile of a defendant, but the polished one she used for live streams. Her followers had been waiting for this day. In fact, she'd teased it on her stories that morning. Court day, pray for me, or don't. Inside, the marble floor echoed with her heels as she entered Courtroom 3B. The fluorescent lights were less forgiving than her ring light, but she didn't care. She believed this was all just bad PR, a situation that could be spun later into a redemption arc. At the front of the room sat Judge Rebecca Hollins, a woman in her late 50s, sharp-eyed behind thin-rimmed glasses. She had presided over hundreds of cases, from theft to assault, and she recognized arrogance when it walked through her doors. Ava's attorney whispered something about posture, decorum, and tone. She nodded absently, already scrolling through her notifications before the bailiff barked, "Phone's off! No recording!" Ava sighed dramatically and slipped the phone into her purse. "Relax," she muttered, just loud enough for the cameras in the back row to catch. When her case was called, State of Rhode Island versus Ava Monroe, she rose, chin tilted high, lips pressed in what she thought looked like confidence. The prosecutor began reading the charges. 1 count of reckless endangerment, 1 count of obstruction, and violation of public safety order during a law enforcement stop. Ava exhaled loudly, rolling her eyes. "Oh, come on," she whispered, earning a sharp look from her lawyer. Judge Hollins noticed. She didn't scold her. She didn't even pause. She simply adjusted her glasses and continued writing notes, which somehow felt worse than a reprimand. The prosecutor went on. The defendant's actions on March 4th were streamed live to more than 200,000 viewers. During the incident, she repeatedly interfered with police instructions, encouraged her audience to mock the responding officer, and drove off at high speed, narrowly missing a bystander. Ava turned to her lawyer, whispering, "They're making it sound like I robbed a bank." But what she didn't see was her mother, Elaine Monroe, sitting quietly in the back row, hands clasped, face pale. She hadn't come for the spectacle. She'd come because she'd seen that video too. When the prosecutor finished, Judge Hollins looked up. Her voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. "Ms. Monroe, how do you plead?" Ava smiled faintly, her tone airy. "Not guilty, Your Honor, obviously." The room rustled. Reporters scribbling, cameras clicking. Judge Hollins nodded once, expression unreadable. "Very well. I suggest you take these proceedings seriously, Miss Monroe. Court isn't content." Ava gave a small performative shrug, barely hiding another eye roll. The judge closed the file, tapping her pen once. "We'll see if you still feel that way by the end of this hearing." Her voice was quiet. But even in that still courtroom, it carried enough weight to make the air change. And Ava smirked again, convinced she'd already won. She didn't know it yet, but 10 seconds of silence later, in the same room, would destroy that smile completely. The bailiff dimmed the courtroom lights slightly as a monitor was rolled to the center of the prosecution's table. The screen glowed blue before cutting to the grainy dashboard view of a police cruiser on a spring evening, a road lined with neon-lit storefronts and night traffic. Prosecutor Liam Kessler stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, the state would like to introduce Exhibit A, A recording obtained from the defendant's own live stream, corroborated by police, dash cam footage. Ava leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "This should be good," she whispered under her breath, lips curling into a faint grin. Judge Hollins nodded to the bailiff. "Proceed." The video began. It showed Ava's phone mounted on the dashboard as she narrated to her followers. "Guys, look at this cop pulling me over for nothing. Probably just wants to be on camera. Say hi to TikTok, officer." Her voice in the recording was mocking, playful, the tone of someone performing, not panicking. The courtroom listened as the footage continued. The officer approached, his voice steady. "Ma'am, license and registration, please." Ava laughed. "You're live right now, officer. 200,000 people watching. You still want to play this game?" The courtroom murmured. The video showed her rummaging for papers with one hand while holding her phone up to the officer's face with the other. "Smile for the live stream," she taunted. Judge Holland's jaw tightened slightly, but she said nothing. Then came the moment that changed everything. The officer's tone hardened. "Ma'am, please turn off your vehicle." Instead, Ava revved the engine. "You can't tell me what to do on my own stream." She threw the car into gear. The body cam footage switched in, grainy but horrifyingly clear, showing the car jerking forward, the officer stepping back, and another pedestrian diving out of the way as tires screeched. The screen froze on the image, headlights cutting through the dark, the reflection of Ava's grinning face in the rearview mirror. The prosecutor turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, the pedestrian seen here was a 15-year-old cousin of the defendant, seated in the passenger seat moments before she decided to flee." A gasp broke through the courtroom. Even Ava's attorney lowered his head, knowing this wasn't the kind of evidence a defense could spin. Judge Holland's pen stopped moving. Ava, however, just shrugged slightly. "It wasn't that bad," she muttered, too quietly for the judge, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. The prosecutor's voice sharpened. "Ms. Monroe, do you still find this amusing?" Her lawyer touched her arm, whispering, "You don't respond." But Ava smirked, eyes half-lidded. "It's just exaggerated. Everyone's acting like I killed someone." A few jurors exchanged glances. Judge Holland's voice was calm but clipped. "Ms. Monroe, this isn't a debate. You will remain silent while the evidence is presented." Ava leaned back again, crossing her legs and rolling her eyes. The cameras behind her flashed softly, reporters noting every gesture. The prosecutor resumed, playing the final seconds of the clip. The live stream audio captured Ava laughing as she sped off, shouting, "This is going viral tonight!" When the video ended, the lights came back on. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the hum of the ceiling vent seemed to vanish. Judge Hollins rested her chin on her hand, eyes fixed on Ava. "Ms. Monroe, do you realize your cousin could have died?" Ava hesitated for half a second, then smirked again. But she didn't. That was the moment the entire courtroom shifted. Reporters stopped writing, jurors stared. And for the first time, the judge's tone changed. No longer patient, no longer clinical, just cold. "We'll proceed," she said, voice low. "But I suggest Ms. Monroe reflect on that answer while she still has the chance." The prosecutor sat down, satisfied. The defense attorney's face had drained of all color. And Ava? She simply fixed her hair and waited for her next spotlight, unaware that the next one wouldn't come from a camera, but from the consequences she had laughed at. By the third day of the hearing, the courthouse gallery was full. Reporters filled the benches. Students from the nearby university came just to watch the influencer case they'd seen all over social media. Ava Monroe treated it like a premiere. She wore a crisp white blouse, a designer skirt, and the faintest trace of perfume. Subtle enough for the cameras, but still enough to say she cared about her image more than the outcome. Her attorney, Gavin Price, wasn't so calm. He shuffled through his notes, sighing quietly. "Ava, please, when I tell you not to react, I mean not to react. Don't whisper, don't smirk, don't exist," she interrupted, smiling. "Don't make it worse," he muttered. The hearing resumed. The prosecutor rose again, introducing a series of character witnesses, professors, a former employer, and even a former friend, all called to paint a fuller picture of who Ava Monroe had become. One by one, they used the same words: entitled, careless, performative. Each statement hit harder than the last. When the prosecutor asked a former co-worker about Ava's personality, she hesitated before saying, "She's charming, I guess. But everything's content to her, even bad things, especially bad things." A ripple of murmurs followed. Judge Hollins raised a hand for silence, then turned to Gavin. "Mr. Price, you may cross-examine." He rose slowly, unbuttoning his jacket. "Ms. Carter," he began, addressing the witness. "You worked with the defendant at a marketing firm, correct?" "Yes." "Would you describe her as irresponsible at work?" "No, not exactly. She did her job." "So she's capable of discipline?" "When she wants something, yes." That wasn't the answer that Gavin wanted, but it was the truth. He exhaled, turned back toward his client, and found her scrolling through her smartwatch beneath the table. He reached over and covered her wrist. "Put that away." Ava blinked, annoyed. "Relax, I'm not posting. I'm just checking my messages." The judge cleared her throat. "Ms. Monroe, if I see another electronic device in your hand during testimony, I'll have the bailiff remove it. Are we clear?" Ava smiled. That same practiced, empty smile. "Crystal, Your Honor." Then she rolled her eyes. It was small, quick, but unmistakable. The kind of gesture that would have gone unnoticed in a classroom or at a party. But not here. Not in Judge Hollins' courtroom. The judge didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She simply leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and looked at Ava. Not with anger, but with something worse. Disappointment. The prosecutor noticed it too, and seized the moment. "Your Honor," he said, "the defense keeps insisting this was immaturity, not malice. I believe the defendant just demonstrated which it was." A few gasps fluttered through the room. Gavin whispered urgently, "Stop giving them ammunition." Ava crossed her arms. "It's just a look." "What, are they going to charge me for that too?" The judge tapped her pen once. "Ms. Monroe, your demeanor matters here. Your reactions matter. You're not performing for a screen. You're being evaluated by 12 people who don't know you, who only see what you show them. Choose wisely." For a brief moment, the words seemed to sink in. Ava's face softened, the first crack in the armor. But then a camera shutter clicked from the back of the courtroom. She turned, smiled faintly, and tilted her chin up, back in character again. Judge Hollins' expression turned unreadable. "Very well," she said quietly. "Let's continue." And that was how Ava Monroe's defense, what little she had left, began to crumble. Not because of the evidence, but because of a smirk. Because even when her freedom was on trial, she still thought she was the star of the show. The next morning, the courtroom filled faster than usual. Word had spread that the arresting officer, the man Ava mocked love to hundreds of thousands, would be taking the stand. Ava sat with her arms folded, pretending to be bored, as Officer Daniel Reeves, a calm, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s, entered the witness box. His uniform was pressed, his badge catching the fluorescent light. Prosecutor Kessler stood. "Officer Reeves, can you describe the events of March 4th, the night you stopped the defendant?" Reeves nodded once, his tone steady. "At approximately 8:45 p.m., I initiated a traffic stop after observing a vehicle traveling at 82 miles per hour in a 50 zone. The vehicle matched reports of reckless driving from multiple callers." He glanced briefly toward Ava. She didn't return the look. She was too busy fixing her hair in the reflection of the water pitcher. "When I approached the driver," Reeves continued, "I identified her as Ms. Ava Monroe. I requested her license and registration. Instead, she aimed her phone at my face and began live streaming the encounter. She said, quote, 'Say hi to TikTok, officer.'" The room chuckled quietly. Not out of humor, but disbelief. "Did she comply with your orders to shut off the engine?" "No, sir." She laughed, made several mocking comments about the police, and appeared more interested in her audience than the situation at hand. When I reached for the door handle, she accelerated suddenly. Kessler nodded grimly. And were there passengers? Yes. Her cousin, a 15-year-old female, was in the passenger seat. When the vehicle lurched forward, she screamed. The car veered toward the sidewalk. I observed a pedestrian dive out of the way. The courtroom murmured again. Ava pressed her lips together, the first hint of tension showing. How did the stop conclude? After she fled, we pursued. She pulled over 3 blocks later when traffic forced her to stop. She exited the vehicle, laughing, and said, "See, I told you it'd go viral." Even the jurors shifted uneasily at that. Kessler paused, letting the silence build before asking his final question. "Officer Reeves, did the defendant ever show remorse or concern for anyone's safety during that encounter?" "No, sir, not once." "Thank you. No further questions." The judge nodded toward the defense. "Mr. Price?" Gavin rose hesitantly. "Officer Reeves, my client was a public figure, under significant online pressure. Is it possible she panicked, overreacted under stress?" Reeves considered it. "I've seen panic, counselor. It doesn't look like that." The quiet honesty in his tone struck harder than any accusation. Gavin nodded weakly. No further questions. Before the officer could step down, Judge Hollins interjected. "Officer Reeves, one final question. In your professional opinion, what could have happened if Ms. Monroe had lost control of that vehicle?" Reeves met the judge's eyes. "Someone would have died, Your Honor." The words echoed. No one spoke for several seconds. Even Ava shifted slightly in her seat, her nails tapping against the wood. Then, as if she couldn't stand the silence, she muttered under her breath, "He's exaggerating. Nobody actually got hurt." The judge's gaze lifted immediately. "Excuse me, Ms. Monroe?" Her lawyer whispered, panicked. "Don't." Ava shrugged. "I said nobody got hurt. That's all." The courtroom went still. Judge Hollins folded her hands, voice calm but razor sharp. "Ms. Monroe, this isn't a conversation. When sworn testimony is given, you do not interrupt it. You will refrain from commentary, or I will have you removed from this courtroom." "Understood." Ava looked away, eyes rolling once again. Subtle. Defiant. But this time, nobody missed it. Even the bailiff's stare lingered. Officer Reeves stepped down, passing by her table. He didn't look at her, didn't say a word. He didn't have to, because the silence that followed, the silence Ava had once filled with jokes, smirks, and live streams, now belonged to everyone else. And for the first time since her trial began, she didn't know how to perform her way out of it. By the time the 5th day began, Ava's smirk was gone. The crowd outside the courthouse had doubled. News vans parked bumper to bumper along the curb. Her story, the social media girl who mocked the judge, had already become a trending headline. But inside the courtroom, something heavier was waiting. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the state calls Mrs. Ellen Monroe to the stand." Every head turned as a thin, tired-looking woman rose from the gallery. Her hands shook slightly as she clutched her purse, and her eyes darted briefly toward Ava, the kind of look that carried both love and exhaustion. Ava's jaw tightened. "What's she doing here?" she whispered to her lawyer. "They have the right to call her," Gavin murmured back. "Just stay quiet." Mrs. Monroe took the oath, her voice barely audible, then settled into the witness chair. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Mrs. Monroe, you are the defendant's mother." "Yes." "Do you currently live with your daughter?" "No, I moved out a year ago." The prosecutor nodded. "Can you tell the court why?" A long pause followed. Mrs. Monroe glanced down, her voice trembling as she began. Ava stopped listening. Everything was for her followers. Every argument, every dinner. It became a performance. If I told her no, she'd pull out her phone and start recording. I became content. Ava's eyes flickered with irritation. "That's not true," she muttered. Judge Hollins didn't even look up from her notes. "Ms. Monroe." One word, enough to silence her. Her mother continued. "I begged her to stop. She'd laugh. Tell me I was jealous because people actually cared about what she said. But the truth is," her voice cracked, "she doesn't care about people. Not really." The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the lights. "Did you see her live stream on the night of the arrest?" "Yes, a friend sent it to me." I watched her laugh while that officer begged her to stop the car. The prosecutor leaned slightly closer. And how did that make you feel? Like I'd already lost her. Ava's head snapped up. Mom, stop talking like that. Mrs. Monroe didn't look at her. She looked at the judge. She wasn't always like this. She used to be sweet, curious. She loved books, loved painting. Then she found that phone, and it was like someone else moved into her body. Someone who thought likes meant love. The room stayed painfully still. Do you believe your daughter understands the seriousness of what she's done? No, she whispered. I don't think she understands anything anymore. Ava's hands curled into fists. You're acting like I'm a monster. It was an accident. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. Ms. Monroe, that's enough. But Mrs. Monroe didn't flinch. For the first time, she turned to face her daughter fully. Her voice was fragile but steady. You keep saying it was an accident, Ava, but every part of your life has been a choice. You chose to film instead of listen. You chose fame over family. And now you're sitting here because you chose to laugh when you should have stopped. Ava froze, her mouth half open. No comeback, no performance. Her mother wiped a tear from her cheek, then turned to Judge Hollins. Your Honor, I'm not here to ask for mercy. I just want her to finally see what she's done. If she can't, then maybe prison's the only place quiet enough for her to hear herself again. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Monroe. You may step down. As she passed by Ava, their eyes met. One last quiet look between mother and daughter. Ava blinked hard, biting her lip, her expression unreadable. For a fleeting second, her mask slipped. Not with remorse, but confusion. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to cry or perform. But either way, the cameras had stopped rolling. And for the first time, nobody was watching. The tension in the courtroom was thicker than the marble pillars that lined it. After her mother's testimony, Ava had gone pale, and the quiet hum of the air conditioning was the only sound as Judge Hollins gavelled the room back to order. We'll now proceed with cross-examination, she said firmly. Gavin Price, Ava's defense attorney, rose slowly, adjusting his tie. He had defended clients who'd done worse, but few who made it harder to feel sympathy for them. He approached the witness stand carefully, glancing once at the jury. Mrs. Monroe, he began, you've been through a lot. You love your daughter, correct? Of course, she said softly. She's my child. And as her mother, you'd want to believe she's capable of change? I'd like to. I just don't know if she wants to. A flicker of emotion crossed Ava's face, but she stayed silent. Gavin nodded, his tone gentler now. You mentioned she wasn't always this way, that she was kind once. Would you agree that her behavior changed gradually over years? Yes. Would it be fair to say she's struggled with mental health issues, anxiety, pressure from online fame? Mrs. Monroe hesitated. I think she got lost, somewhere between real life and the screen. The defense attorney turned to the jury. There are millions of young people lost in that same space, he said softly. They're not criminals. They're children raised in a world that rewards attention over empathy. A few jurors nodded slightly. Not agreement, exactly, but thoughtfulness. Gavin leaned in gently toward Mrs. Monroe. If she were given the chance to learn, to grow, would you want her to? She looked toward her daughter for the first time since taking the stand. Ava's eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were damp, though no one could tell if it was guilt or humiliation. Yes, her mother said, but she has to want to change, and I don't think she does. Gavin exhaled slowly. No further questions. As Mrs. Monroe stepped down, the courtroom seemed to breathe again. Ava kept her gaze fixed on the table, jaw tight. Then, without warning, the prosecutor stood. Your Honor, the state requests to recall the defendant. Gavin tensed. Your Honor, my client's already testified. I'm aware, Judge Hollins interrupted, but given the new context, I'll allow limited questioning. Ms. Monroe, please take the stand. The entire courtroom seemed to shift forward as Ava rose, smoothing her skirt. She walked with exaggerated calm, but the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her nerves. After swearing her in again, the prosecutor stepped closer. "Ms. Monroe," he began evenly, "you've heard your mother's testimony. Is there anything you'd like to say about it?" Ava forced a smirk. "She's emotional. She doesn't really understand the online world." "And you do?" "I make a living from it." "By mocking people in uniform? By endangering a minor?" Her smirk faltered. "It wasn't like that." "Then explain. What was it like?" Ava glanced at the cameras, then at the jury. "It was pressure. People expect entertainment. If I go quiet, I lose followers. I was just trying to make it interesting." "By breaking the law?" "By making a mistake," she snapped. "One that everyone blew out of proportion." The prosecutor folded his arms. "So you think this entire courtroom, your fans, your mother, the law, all exaggerated what happened?" She hesitated. "Yeah," she said finally, her voice firm again. "People overreact." That sentence landed like a stone dropped into water, ripples of disbelief spreading across the courtroom. The prosecutor leaned in, voice low and deliberate. "Tell me, Ms. Monroe, was it overreaction when that pedestrian nearly died because you wanted views?" Ava's face drained of color. "I didn't mean..." "You didn't mean? Or you didn't care?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Judge Hollins lifted a hand. "That's enough." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ava lowered her gaze, blinking quickly, her breath catching for the first time since the trial began. For the first time, she didn't look like an influencer. She looked like a scared kid who'd finally realized no amount of followers could save her. And the courtroom, the same one she'd once mocked with her smirk, was completely, utterly silent. By the final day of the trial, there were no empty seats left in courtroom 3B. The story had captured every local headline. Influencer faces reality, from live streams to life lessons. Reporters whispered into microphones in the hallway. Viewers at home waited for a verdict that was already beginning to feel inevitable. Inside, the energy had changed. The tension was quieter now, heavier, like everyone knew what was coming but still needed to hear it said out loud. Judge Hollins called the courtroom to order. "Mr. Kessler, you may proceed with your closing statement." The prosecutor stood and approached the jury box with deliberate calm. He didn't bring charts or props, just a thin file and a steady voice. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this case has never been about technology. It's about responsibility." He let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. "The defendant, Ms. Ava Monroe, made choices. She chose to mock authority. She chose to flee from the police, and she chose to turn a criminal act into entertainment, and she chose to laugh, even as others could have died because of her arrogance." He turned, gesturing subtly toward the defense table. "You've seen the footage. You've heard her words. You've even heard her say right here in this courtroom that people overreact." He paused, his eyes fixed on the jurors. That wasn't the voice of remorse. That was the same voice you heard on the live stream, the same one that laughed when an officer told her to stop. And it's the same voice her own mother doesn't recognize anymore. A few jurors shifted in their seats, glancing at Ava. She sat motionless, eyes downcast, hair shadowing her face. Kessler continued, "This case isn't about making an example of her. It's about reminding all of us that freedom, even the freedom to speak, to perform, to post, it doesn't mean freedom from consequence. You don't get to endanger lives and then hide behind a screen." He closed his file. Justice doesn't care about followers, it cares about accountability. And today, accountability must be served. He nodded respectfully to the judge and returned to his seat. Then it was Gavin Price's turn. The defense attorney rose slowly, his expression tired but composed. He adjusted his glasses and approached the same jury box, his tone soft, almost pleading. "You've heard the prosecution talk about arrogance," he began. "Schatz," he began. "But arrogance isn't evil. It's ignorance wearing a mask." He gestured gently toward his client. Ava Monroe isn't a hardened criminal. She's a 22-year-old girl raised in a world that taught her that attention equals worth. Every mistake she made in front of millions of people. You've seen how the world reacts to people like her, with outrage, mockery, and hate. But what she needs is understanding. A pause. I'm not asking you to excuse her behavior. I'm asking you to see what's left of the person beneath it. The child her mother described, the one who lost her way chasing a world that never forgives. He turned slightly, looking toward the judge. Give her a chance to rebuild, to learn, to live with what she's done. Because the punishment of silence, of knowing she destroyed her own life with a single smirk, that will echo longer than any sentence. He sat down quietly, hands folded. For a long moment, nobody moved. Judge Hollins looked at the clock, then back to the jury. You've heard the evidence. You've heard both sides. You will now retire to deliberate. The jurors rose and filed into the adjoining room, the sound of their shoes on tile echoing like a slow metronome. Ava's lawyer leaned close. You did fine, he whispered. But she didn't answer. She was staring at the judge's bench, at the same seat she'd rolled her eyes at, laughed at, dismissed as irrelevant. And for the first time, she looked like she understood what it meant to have no control. The cameras outside were still rolling. The internet was still watching. But inside that courtroom, for the first time in her life, Ava Monroe had nothing left to perform. The jury deliberated for just under 3 hours. Ava sat motionless the entire time. No phone, no whispers, no performative sighs, just silence. Every tick of the courtroom clock pressed heavier on her chest. Her lawyer tried to speak to her, but she didn't respond. The confidence she once wielded like armor had evaporated. All that remained was a hollow stare fixed on the wood grain of the defense table. At 3:42 p.m., the bailiff's voice broke the quiet. All rise, jury returning. The room filled with movement. Reporters adjusted cameras, sketch artists lifted their pencils, and Judge Hollins took her seat. Ava stood, her knees trembling slightly. The jury foreperson, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose, rose from her seat, holding the verdict form with both hands. Madam Foreperson, the judge said, has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? We have, Your Honor. Please read it. The woman's voice was steady, but the words carried weight that no one could soften. In the matter of State of Rhode Island versus Ava Monroe, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts: reckless endangerment, obstruction, and violation of public safety order. The courtroom murmured. Cameras flashed. Ava's eyes widened slightly, her lips parting. Not in defiance this time, but disbelief. She turned toward her lawyer. All counts, she whispered. He gave a slow, resigned nod. Judge Hollins thanked the jury, dismissed them for the day, and then turned her attention back to the defendant. Her expression was unreadable, neither triumphant nor cruel, just tired. Ms. Monroe, please step forward. Ava did, one slow step at a time. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The judge spoke calmly. I've watched you in this courtroom for several days. I've seen the deflection, the sarcasm, the unwillingness to accept responsibility. But I've also seen something else. A young woman who's never had to face the sound of her own silence. Ava swallowed hard. This was never about fame or followers. It was about the value of a human life. Yours, your cousins, the bystanders. You treated that night like content. But life isn't content, Ms. Monroe. It's consequence. The judge leaned forward slightly. You willfully endangered others for the sake of attention. You showed no remorse until this very moment. And even now, I'm not sure you understand what remorse means. Ava blinked rapidly, her lower lip trembling. For these reasons, I am sentencing you to 4 years in state prison and 3 years of probation following your release. During that time, you will complete a mandatory rehabilitation program for digital abuse and public accountability. The words hit her like a physical blow. 4 years? She whispered. 4 years, the judge repeated, and I hope every one of those days teaches you something no video ever could. The gavel struck once. Court is adjourned. The sound echoed through the chamber like the end of a broadcast. Sharp, final. Ava stood frozen as the bailiff approached. Reporters began shouting questions, but their voices blurred into background noise. She felt the cold touch of handcuffs, the metallic click behind her back. Her mother, seated in the gallery, pressed a tissue to her lips, silent tears streaming down her face. As Ava was led past her, she turned for just a second, and their eyes met. There was no anger there anymore, only the realization that this was what it felt like when the screen went dark. No filters, no comments, no retakes, just reality. And as the doors closed behind her, the faint echo of her mother's earlier words seemed to linger in the air. If she can't hear the world now, maybe prison's the only place quiet enough for her to finally listen. When the heavy steel doors closed behind her, Ava Monroe stopped being a celebrity. The air inside the county detention center felt colder than she'd imagined, sterile, stripped of color. The guard's voice was monotone as she listed Ava's belongings into a plastic bag. One phone, one bracelet, one purse, one watch. Each item clinked faintly as it disappeared through the slot. It sounded like her life being sealed away. Ava kept her head low while they processed her. Fingerprints, mugshot, inmate number. The bright flash of the camera stung her eyes, and for a strange, disorienting moment, it reminded her of paparazzi lights. But this time, nobody called her name. Nobody asked for a pose. By the time she was led to her cell, her mascara had smudged. The cell was small, concrete gray, with a metal cot bolted to the wall and a window too narrow to see through properly. "Dinner's in an hour," said the guard. "Welcome to reality." He shut the door. The lock clicked. Ava sat down on the cot, her hands still trembling. The silence pressed against her ears until she couldn't stand it. She whispered to herself, "This can't be real." But it was. The next morning, she woke to the clang of metal doors and the distant echo of orders being barked. Her hair was tangled, her throat dry. She reached instinctively for her phone, and then remembered. No phone, no messages, no audience. Days turned into weeks. Inmates recognized her, but not the way she expected. "Hey, TikTok girl," one said, passing by. "Where's your camera now?" She didn't respond. She had learned silence. She worked in the laundry room, folding uniforms under humming fluorescent lights. The repetitive motion numbed her mind. Sometimes she thought she heard echoes of her mother's voice in the rhythm of the machines. If she can't hear the world now, maybe prison's the only place quiet enough. At night, she replayed her mother's testimony in her head. The words that had once angered her now haunted her. Everything became a performance. She doesn't care about people. Not really. She had hated hearing it. Now she wasn't so sure it wasn't true. One afternoon, a counselor named Dr. Lena Perez visited her as part of the rehabilitation program the judge had mandated. She was kind but direct, the kind of person Ava used to call boring online. "Tell me what you've learned," Dr. Perez asked. Ava stared at the table between them. "That people are cruel," she said, "that they don't forgive." The counselor nodded slowly. "And what about you? Do you forgive yourself?" Ava hesitated. "I don't know how." The counselor didn't push her. "That's the first honest thing you've said to me." It took months. But slowly, the masks began to fall away. Without makeup, followers, or filters, Ava faced something she'd avoided all her life, herself. She started reading again, writing letters, helping new inmates with their forms. One day, she was assigned to teach a literacy class for younger offenders. When one of them asked how she'd ended up there, she almost laughed. "Because I thought views mattered more than people." For the first time in years, it wasn't a performance. It was a confession. Outside the prison, her story had already faded. The internet had moved on. New scandals, new faces, new distractions. The viral moment that had once defined her life now existed as a forgotten clip buried beneath millions of others. And yet, for Ava, every second of that clip replayed in her mind each night before she slept. The smirk, the eye roll, the officer's calm voice, and her mother's tearful face in the courtroom. 4 years felt like forever, but it also felt like exactly how long it might take to become someone different. She didn't know if she ever could, but for the first time, she wanted to try. When Ava Monroe was finally led out of the courtroom that day, there were no cheers, no cameras, no one to record her final walk. The same reporters who once begged for interviews now turned their lenses elsewhere, chasing the next story, the next fall from grace. And maybe that was the real ending. Not the sentence itself, but the silence that came after it. For everyone watching from the gallery, her lawyer, the prosecutor, even the bailiff who'd once escorted her in, that silence felt like justice. Not vengeance, not spectacle, just consequence. Finally catching up to someone who thought the world revolved around her screen. Judge Hollins later said in an interview that Ava wasn't evil, just empty. She confused attention for love. And when you live like that long enough, the judge said, you start mistaking applause for forgiveness. No one really knew what became of Ava after prison. Some say she kept her head down, working quietly at a nonprofit after her release. Others claim she disappeared entirely, refusing interviews, deleting her old accounts, vanishing into the kind of anonymity she once feared most. But those who remember her trial, that smirk, that eye roll, that final moment of silence, never forgot the look on her face when the judge said, "Life isn't content, it's consequence." That single line became a headline, then a quote shared by teachers, parents, and even digital platforms trying to warn the next generation of influencers where fame without empathy leads. In the end, Ava's story wasn't just about arrogance. It was about what happens when reality stops being enough. Now, let me ask you this. If the judge were in front of you and you had 1 minute to tell the truth about your worst mistake, what would you say? And do you think people should be forgiven if they only change after getting caught? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one of them. If you found this story powerful, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on that bell icon so you never miss the next one. And if you're watching till the end, share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight, because tomorrow we'll be back right here, same time, with another story that reminds us how fragile justice can be. Until then, take care. And remember, this story is a work of fiction and not based on real events.